All right, thanks everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Brian Robinson, and I'm part of the theme under the McGill Sustainability Systems Initiative that is engaged in thinking about sustainable landscapes. So the team that co-leads the Sustainable Landscapes theme is myself, Elena Bennett, and Lakshmi Sushama. So why landscapes? Why is this a theme that we've chosen to invest in as a community around McGill? So one, landscapes represent this kind of intermediate scale where we see a lot of interactions taking place. It's not the plot level scale where we want to investigate sort of micro level, as Dean Lennox remarked, sort of these reductionist scientific properties. It's not the global scale where we want to affect change, but it's hard to know where to sink your teeth in at that scale. Landscapes are often where policies happen. They're where we see people and nature interacting. And we think it's a useful scale to start thinking about these kinds of processes. And key here is that understanding these local level, more landscape scale processes are key to understanding how to affect change and how to understand sustainability on that global scale as well. As a theme, we've come up with, we have 5 different goals that we've developed over the time. First is we want to create a community of researchers here at McGill, a community that recognize themselves as landscape sustainability scholars or sustainability scholars more broadly. We want to mobilize this interdisciplinary research. We realize that here we have lots of individuals doing world-class science in their individual labs, and we want to try to bring some of that together to create a community at McGill that also affects landscapes and landscape change more locally. We want to engage and train students to become these kinds of interdisciplinary scholars that we seek to be ourselves, but try to develop that from the ground up where they directly in their training programs. We also want to eventually engage stakeholders in and around Montreal, and we want to establish McGill as a leader in these activities. So far, we've been focused mostly on the first 3 activities. As we develop and create more of a community, we're going to work more around engaging stakeholders and establishing our leadership in that capacity. But as an example, one of the ways that we've been developing a community around McGill is we have convened a series of workshops, and we've developed a common framework around which we try to understand this idea of landscape sustainability. So the traditional model of what a landscape might be or how you might go about researching landscapes is thinking about people interacting in the place they live and trying to understand relationships between those things. At least as a model for development, as a landscapes theme, we're trying to recognize that it's not just the things that happen locally, but we also have these connections with other landscapes as well, right? So things that are happening on the landscape might be a product of things that come from a different landscape. So the people and interactions of different things that are happening on distant landscapes, say things like trade and production activities that are embedded here in Montreal, maybe those are a product of things that are happening in other places, the kinds of crops we grow, the kinds of goods that we buy. These are all things that are interacting with landscapes in different places. So to understand landscapes sustainability, we need to not only look at what manifests itself here, but also the connections with other landscapes across space. So in particular, we have developed several research projects that utilize this framework. So one connects people to place. We sort of take the place as a place that is producing goods and producing services, and how those goods and services are connected to people in one location, and that's represented by the green arrows here. In another series of projects, we're taking people as the end users of those products and looking at how the place then sends its goods and its services across space to other people. And finally, a working definition of landscape sustainability is that we are trying to try to understand where landscapes have the capacity to provide long-term and locally specified ecosystem services that are essential to support or maintain our current well-being and the future well-being of residents here as well, in this regional context and in light of ongoing changes in environmental and social structures. So now I'll turn it over to Lakshmi, and she'll give you a little bit more of an idea of the kinds of some of the more specific projects happening in northern landscapes.
So I'm going to use my 3 minutes to tell you a little bit about what we have been doing within Northern Landscapes theme, which is within this broader sustainable landscapes theme as well. So this is a slide coming from the last presentation we gave about a year back. This is a framework we put forward for looking at sustainable northern landscapes. So first of all, to look at sustainable landscapes, we need to understand what is happening with these northern landscapes given climate change. And for that, what we have to do is do climate modeling. Rather, we should look at it from an Earth system perspective. So we are going to be doing regional Earth system modeling to try and understand northern landscapes and northern climate. And this information will be used to understand feedbacks and interactions and how they change in a changing climate, look at extreme weather and climate, as well as to look at other aspects collaboratively. So we will be bringing together experts from different areas within McGill to look at these aspects. And this information that is going to be generated is going to feed into what I show there at the bottom there to inform northern engineering initiatives, in particular to look at reliable and resilient engineering strategies. So based on the interest that was developed, we decided to focus on 3 engineering sectors, that being energy, infrastructure, and mining. Well, social science is important. Social priorities are important. You can see from this figure that's looking very weak. This was something that wasn't developed very well last year. So we put quite a bit of emphasis on this. In the beginning, we thought it's just about bringing researchers, social scientists from McGill to work with us collaboratively. And it was pointed out by somebody about doing research in the north. I learned in the last couple of months, it's very different. If it is anything about the north, research in the north, the policies have changed quite a bit. So it is about working with people in the north. And I must say, for the first time, I went to all 3 provinces, the territories. That's again a big difference to understand some of the priorities so that we can come back and frame those projects that we are trying to deal within MSSI such that it's going to be useful involving people from the north. So quite a bit of work has been put into that, and the end goal is to come up with powerful integration of science, technology, and social sciences. And I can say now that it is starting to happen, and we are seeing much more things happening in those directions. So I said about climate modeling, so I just wanted to give you some ideas of what we have been doing. So when I have been discussing with people, we realize that especially with the engineering community, that we need to have ultra high resolution simulations. So this is something we are planning to do. We decided to focus in the north because it's about northern landscapes. So we are trying to do high resolution climate change information, generate that information. By high resolution, I mean 4 kilometers. So the approach we take is to telescopically nest limited area domains at decreasing horizontal grid spacings. So there is tons of information that's coming out of these climate change simulations, and we try to work with people, and this is already happening with researchers from different disciplines, different faculties. I give an example there. We have been discussing with people from atmosphere, ocean sciences, earth and planetary sciences, geography, civil, and other engineering disciplines to look, for example, at fire, wildland fire, and its impacts on communities, management, etc. So it's all about fire meteorology, climatology, hydrology, engineering, management, etc., etc., just to give you an example. So I mentioned these are 4-kilometer resolution simulations. We have been talking with communities, and we realize even 4 kilometers is sometimes going to be not sufficient. So this diagram that you're looking at, if you can see, I mean, it's a bit small. I'm showing the different communities in Yukon, Northwest Territories, as well as in Nunavut. So if you're going to be focusing on some of the engineering-related applications, community-related as well, otherwise we have to do much further downscaling. So additional downscaling is required, and that image is just showing the 33 communities of Northwest Territories. And I had the chance to meet with, not meet, rather be in a meeting where 28 communities had come together for a climate change forum. So that helped me understand quite a bit of some of the research priorities, which I was able to bring back to the group and discuss such that we can design projects around those and involve them as well. As an example, what you're looking at, so this is an example of integrated research that we plan to undertake related to transportation infrastructure. So it's going to be land, air, and water. So what you're looking at is the Northwest Territories highway system. So there are different colors there, and actually you can see the paved ones and the ice roads, etc. So most of these ice roads are currently being replaced, or there are plans to replace them in the future. So this is something we are planning to work around in some of our projects. This is, again, I call them as airports, if you can see. There are tiny planes everywhere. So even though it's called as airports, they are nothing but runways in most of the northern region. So to look at the vulnerability of those runways and how they could be designed differently, etc., these are some of the things we are planning to do, and some have already started within the Northern Landscapes theme. Of course, I should not forget about seaports. You know, given climate change, and the expectation is that we are going to have sea ice-free summers by the middle of the century or by the end of the century, according to many global climate models. So people are starting to think about seaports, having new ones set up, or even looking at the ones that's already there, how climate change can impact those in terms of structural integrity, etc., given that there could be more and more stronger waves, etc., that's happening. So which tells us that we may have to start thinking about doing wave, storm surge, sea level rise modeling, etc. And we had some interesting discussions last week with many researchers coming from different disciplines, and we are starting to do something along these lines as well. So all of these projects, as Brian already mentioned, we have been making an effort to bring in expertise and know-how from across McGill, and to also create space for integrative and interdisciplinary research. We did have some short-term goals, medium and long-term goals. The short-term goals had been to come up with precision white papers, as was discussed earlier as well, and some of those are in the pipeline, close to finishing. So it's about sustainable mining in the north and sustainable infrastructure. They were kind of short-term goals, but the short became a little bit of a medium as well. But these things always happen in research, and when it's about bringing people together to work on this. And of course, there are the medium to long-term goals to carefully design activities that will eventually lead to innovation and integrated smart tools, which is something I kind of started presenting. So I think with that, I'll stop and
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Lakshmi and Alina and Brian. What are some of the ways that we use our local agricultural landscapes for food consumption in Montreal? And why does that even matter? So that's something we're trying to understand in this project. We are launching an interdisciplinary project to understand Montreal's local food sheds, so different food sourcing configurations and connections between Montreal and its local agricultural landscape. And we're looking for collaborators. So we've done a lot of thinking about this. We've done some of the hard foundational work, but now we're ready to discuss this and build the project together. So we're hoping for 5 to 10 different faculty from across McGill, and also graduate student researchers and undergraduate student researchers who would like to get involved. And so obviously there's a large amount of agriculture in southern Quebec. And we understand where agriculture is taking place, and we understand to some degree at least what's being consumed in Montreal, but in many ways we don't understand how those are connected. So what's that missing middle? How are the ways that our local agroecosystems are connected to consumers in Montreal, and what are the distributors involved in that, and why does that matter? And also, what are some of the ways that this comes together? So maybe the roles of different governance and policy measures in bringing this together. And we want to focus on the Montérégie, so the area just to the south and to the east of Montreal. And particularly starting with connecting agroecosystems, so the farms in the Montérégie to food consumers in Montreal and through different distribution models and different retailers here in the city. So understand those direct linkages, but also build upon that and say, well, so what are some of the social and governance dimensions of that? So what are the institutions or policies or marketing strategies that make all of this happen? Then what's happening actually on the farms? What are some of the agroecosystem level implications? And then what does that matter for other ecosystems? So what are the implications this might have for water use, water quality, for forests and biodiversity that might indirectly link food consumers in Montreal to the local agricultural landscape, maybe 100 kilometers away? And then how do all those things interact so that they come together and form multiple ecosystem services, so we can think about trade-offs or benefits across multiple different ecosystem services? Then we can also run models, or maybe we can look at spatial models of these different food source configurations and say, well, what if we had a counterfactual where we didn't increase local production, instead we imported more food? Or what if we increase local food production? What does that mean for trade-offs across multiple different ecosystem services or outcomes in this system? So our first workshop will be held at the beginning of January, and if you'd like to be involved, please let me know. You can email graham.mcdonald@mcgill.ca or one of the landscape sustainability members, and we'd really like to have your input on forging this project.
Okay, so I will be quick without speaking like the New Yorker that I am, and my job here is to just take a minute or two and sum up what's going on and remind you a little bit about what you've heard. You've heard about some regional climate modeling work that we're doing. You've heard about work that we're doing to frame landscape sustainability and develop a conceptual framework by which we can assess whether landscapes are sustainable or not, and how we're implementing that in a food system to understand food system sustainability, and also a little bit about the role of trade and teleconnections in landscape sustainability. All projects that we're undertaking under the overarching theme of the MSSI landscapes area. And those were developed really to build research capacity at McGill in areas where we felt like we had strength enough to proceed that were also areas of international research interest. We are now working with over a half dozen, really almost a dozen different departments across both campuses of McGill to try to actively bring an interdisciplinarity, a multidisciplinarity to this research. We have a landscape scholars program that was mentioned just briefly, but I will encourage you to have a look at this program's at the students' poster that they have made out there. This is 8 graduate students from 4 departments who are working on an interdisciplinary project to try to understand the role of trade in landscape sustainability, especially focused on food. They just got started this fall and are already up to great things that we're very excited about. And then finally, my job is to talk about moving forward, and I just want to draw your attention to a Pitch or Enrich event that the landscapes theme will be holding on December 6th from 9 to 1 downtown in the FDA building, room 211. This event is a chance for you, if you have a great idea and need a little bit of funding to get it motivated, show up, register first of all. You can go onto the MSSI website and register to either pitch or enrich. If you want to pitch, that means giving a 3-minute flash presentation about your idea. We will then have enriched sessions where you'll be able to get feedback and develop collaborations around that idea. And a few weeks after that, we will open up for people to submit research proposals, which we can fund. So if you have a great idea, show up to the Pitch or Enrich and pitch us your idea. Thanks.